Dear colleagues, guests, and participants, my name is Aleksa Filipovic, and in front of the Institute of European Studies, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to our webinar dedicated to the 110th anniversary of the start of the First World War. Now, as you know, we have esteemed guests present here. I will first introduce Sir Lord Deјvid Ovен, and then I will give a word to our director, who wishes to greet us all with a few chosen words. So, Lord Deјvid Oven is a British politician who served as a Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs from 1977 to 1979. Being the youngest person to hold the post, he was a member of the Labour Party and later one of the founders and leaders of the Social-Democratic Party. He served as a member of the British Parliament from 1966 to 1992, and he led the Social-Democratic Party from 1983 to 1987 and from 1998 to 1990. He was appointed a life peer in the House of Lords in 1992 and served there from 1992 to 2014. Initially belonging to the group of crossbenchers, he became part of the group of independent Social Democrats in 2014. He played an important diplomatic role in the wars of the former Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, where he was considered one of the most important peacemakers during the civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He is best known as the co-author of two significant peace plans for the ending the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993, the Vens-Ovenovo plan and the Oven-Stoltenberg plan. Now, after this introduction, I would like to give floor to our esteemed director, Jasha Đorković. Director, you have the floor.
Okay, Aleksa, thank you very much. And first of all, I really do want to thank our friend Vladimir RUSIси, who have helped us actually and provided us possibility to have his lordship today with us as a distinguished introductory speaker. Vladimir, thank you very much for this more than noble and useful initiative. I'm glad that we are cooperating together. I just have to remind that a couple of years ago, we had a fantastic webinar as well with Ambassador Peter Galbraith, and that it was very useful additional knowledge, or let me say post-factual understanding of what has really been happening in the 90s at our space here. So now it's of course great honor and privilege to have Mr. Deјvid Ovен with us, and Mr. Ovен, thank you very much for accepting this invitation and giving us possibility to listen to you today. We will, of course, and of course, not to forget our dear friend, Professor Čedomir ANTIS from Faculty of Philosophy, actually, with whom, of course, we had already possibility to work in several occasions, but not recently. I have to emphasize as well that it's a great privilege and opportunity that we are having possibility to hear him as well. And as far as I can see, we have more than 30 people who are with us today, which seems that we will have some very interesting discussion. And besides, of course, we hope that after the initial introduction, we will have possibility to debate, ask many things, since, of course, Mr. Ovен is one of the most important witnesses, and let me say his testimonies, which he already spoke about in '95 actually, and this book is translated to Serbian. I have to remind Balkan Odyssey, but it's going to be also very interesting to listen about his actual and current perspective about what is really happening in the world and what is happening with us. Without further ado, thank you very much for being with us today. And Aleksa, please continue with the seminar.
Thank you. And can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Good. Well, I think I've given you 5 sheets of paper as an introduction to what I'm saying. And the first one is on the First World War, and it gives a picture of the book which I wrote called The Hidden Perspective, and the quotes from Henry Kissinger. And I knew Henry Kissinger quite well, and he was rather fascinated by my interpretation of the role of the British Foreign Secretary. Lord Grey is considered by the historians to have been a great figure. He never travelled outside Britain except for once to Paris, and the days of being in communication with your fellow foreign secretaries, his view was they should come to him. I am very critical of the decision that he took within 5 weeks of taking office as Foreign Secretary in 1905, when he agreed to enter talks with his French counterparts about sending a British expeditionary force to France in the event of a German attack. He never told even his Prime Minister that he'd made this commitment, and the cabinet was not told until 1911, when Asquith, who the Prime Minister, was informed, 3 years after he became Prime Minister. So this hidden perspective, this commitment to go in to rescue France if it was attacked with a British military force, is not given enough discussion, because there was another option. This was for Britain to say, we'll help you in any way we reasonably can, but we are not going to commit to an intercontinental war. We're a maritime nation. You will always have our support through our Royal Navy, but we are not a land, part of the land of Europe, and we have not and will not make a decision in advance. So you shouldn't guarantee that we will come in on your side as a military force. Now, that seems to shock some people, but looking back at history is always very difficult. The historians set the passage and seem to more or less assume that Britain should have been involved. Well, I personally think it would have been far wiser for Britain to have stayed back a little bit, kept the largest navy in the world. Germany was building up its navy, and we were telling Germany that we wanted them to reduce that navy, but certainly if they were not going to take any notice of us, we would match that. That would be our military commitment to Europe, primarily, and not land-based forces. But we would ensure that our navy was strong enough to deal with Germany or any other hostile force. So I come to the view of the German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg, who remarked about the Haldane mission, which the British cabinet did send to discuss the issues before the war to Germany, that he had wished that that had been successful. And it was very close to being successful. And it was well-conducted negotiations. And if Grey had backed Haldane totally and completely, I believe it would have been successful. It went into the issue of Germany feeling that they would not got any foreign possessions, and Britain was prepared to discuss passing some of our foreign possessions in Africa and elsewhere to Germany. And we were prepared to accept that they needed to be more of a world power. They didn't need to get that by a war with France, let alone any concept of war with us. And these Haldane discussions showed that there was a readiness of Germany to move on this whole thing. And they were interested in having some of our foreign colonial, if you like, territory. So we were accepting Germany's wish to become a world power, to have it represented with actual colonial possessions, and to try to work out a system where the three countries, France, Germany, and Britain, could work together. So I don't go into the whole argument about what happened in the Balkans and who did what to who. I think this is a secondary matter, if I might say so. if we had got right the German-French-British relationship, then I don't think it would have mattered very much what happened in the Balkans itself. Germany would have felt strong enough to deal with it, would feel that there was not going to be intervention by either French or Germany in a hostile way, and if anything, that they would be able to rely on dialogue between the three countries. So I don't deny this is a different perception to what is the normal conventional view of the causes of the First World War, and how it, in some historians' view, that it was all inevitable. It was inevitable, this war. I don't believe it was at all. I think what had to happen was that France had to feel that we had a friend in Britain, but they couldn't assume that we would come in with them on the continent. I think that would make them much less aggressive and less obviously deteriorating relations between Germany and France, because France would not have wanted to feel they would fight that war alone. If their hostilities did involve themselves, Britain would have used the Navy, and if need be, blockaded supplies to Germany from the sea, and also blockaded military adventurism from any of the German Navy. So in that sense, it wouldn't be neutral, but it wouldn't be committed to any one side, and it would have been able to use its diplomacy and being able to use its undoubted naval strength to make both Germany and France hesitate to go into war with each other, because they would always know that Britain was ready to intervene, more likely on the side of the French. But if the French were seen to be aggressive and Germany was searching for peace, then Britain wouldn't commit forces at all. Now, I don't know if that's a good enough summary of what I'm saying, and whether you'd like to take it further, either by questions to me or other people making a contribution. I should stress this is an unconventional view of the First World War. I do not believe it was inevitable, and I think it was a massive mistake for our Foreign Secretary Grey to make this military commitment and never let the cabinet know from the moment it was made, from 1915 to 1911. And by the time the cabinet discussed the situation, France and Britain were hugely committed to fighting Germany together. And I think it was an abuse of cabinet government. It was an abuse, first of all, not even to tell Asquith until 1911, and the cabinet should have been told at the same time. And I think that it should have been disowned, actually, and it should have been made clear to Grey that he would have to tell the French that the military conversations did not betoken a prior commitment for Britain to come in and fight on the continent with France. So it's up to you now. Anybody can ask me questions, or I can help in any way. As I say, it's an unconventional view of history, and it's very critical of Grey.
I think that we will leave questions for the later, so you can continue undisturbed with your lecture.
Pardon? Is that addressed to me?
Yes, considering that you said if anybody has now some questions, we will leave them for the later, so you can speak freely undisturbed the whole lecture, and later we'll have discussion.
No, but actually, if I can join a little bit, if I understood, actually, Lord thinks this was with his previous sheets of paper, some kind of introduction, actually, with the basis, and that now I think Professor ANTIS could comment on that, and I think that also Mr. РУСИси has several additions to that. And of course, after that, we could start with the questions.
All right, Director, then I will just make a short introduction of Professor Antić for our audience, and I will give the floor to him. So Professor Čedomir Antić graduated from history at the University of Belgrade in 1999 as the first in his generation. He attended a Master of Arts course in Contemporary History at the University of Bristol, and he also took a Master in Philosophy in Modern History at the University of Belgrade. In 2008, Professor Antić obtained a PhD in History from the University of Belgrade. His PhD thesis is titled Great Britain and Serbia during the 1914-1918 War. Čedomir Antić has been a fellow at the Institute for Balkan Studies of the Serbian Academy of Science and Arts since 2000. Since November 2022, Čedomir Antić is a professor at the Department of History, Faculty of Philosophy in Belgrade. Antić has published several books on the modern and contemporary political history of Serbia and the Serbs, including The History of the Republic of Srpska, Republicanism in Serbia, and the New Serbian Historical Atlas, Introduction to Historical Studies, and The Unchosen Ally, Great Britain and Serbia in the First World War. Now, after this short introduction, please, Professor Antić, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Lordship, my dear well-estimated colleagues, I am very grateful for your invitation, and I would say for the first that I have read Lord Owen's book, and I was also very impressed by it, and there are several new hypotheses in it, and I would say that they are very, very important, and that issue was highly neglected, but I would not say that they are revolutionary, because I think that there is no event in history, there is no war in history, which was so much explored and so much regretted as it was the case with the Great War, or First World War, as we call it, after 1945. I would first say some praise to British politicians and historians, because we have His Lordship, Lord Owen, and we had Baron Douglas Hurd, who also wrote very, very good books about British diplomatical history. And I, with great regret, should say that those are rare exemptions in modern politics, because nowadays politicians, they are not intellectuals, not to mention social scientists, scholars, or writers of so big and important books. I would say something about the problem of the First World War. I think that nothing since probably the introduction of Christianity and conversion into Christianity in Europe was so important as First World War, and especially the decade, or maybe decades, which predecessed it, because entire our world of the 20th and the 21st century was shaped after the First World War, much more, according to my opinion, than it was the case with the Second World War, which is ideologically very, very present now, but it was not so influential and so important as the First World War was. And I think that common misinterpretation about the war comes from our lacking of context, because before the First World War, before 1914, world could not even imagine that kind of warfare. The Crimean War was something similar, but Crimea was a remote place where so many people perished, most of them by diseases. But that kind of industrial war, perishing of entire generations, was not common to Europeans. It was related with maybe some early modern wars, but not in that extent and not globally, or at least as a European phenomena. And Europe ceased to be the world dominant political force. Before 1914, 6 out of 6 great powers were in Europe. Now I think that Europe united maybe could compose one very, very important power in modern world with, I don't know, 4 or 5 major players and one superpower, United States, which is contested now in certain degree. And I would say that many historians try to explore some kind of alternatives. And for example, Paul Kennedy, in his doctoral thesis, he explored relations between Germany and Great Britain before the First World War. He argued that had World War hadn't happened, if it hadn't happened before 1916, France and Germany would be so united economically that World War could not happen at all. But I think that, you know, it is something like one-dimensional looking into historical processes. There are so many layers in history, and after several decades of peaceful world, epoch of the greatest advancement of science, of industry, of economy, of culture, belle epoch, people underestimated wars. They believed that war would, in some degree, make a world cleaner, better. And of course, our generations despise that kind of opinion, but that was dominant opinion. People thought that war would last for several weeks or maybe months, and that before Christmas, everyone, our boys, would come back home. Another issue were those vectors of power which ran Europe in those days. It's hard to believe that Germany or some Eastern powers, for example, the Ottoman Empire of Russia, would change their political identity peacefully. It was very hard to say. And Britain, before 1914, was impressed by idea that they could lose their world role and dominance because of isolation. And I would say that Expeditionary Corps, British Expeditionary Corps, was not the first time that Britain sent expeditionary forces. You know, Wellington defeated Napoleon in one kind of expeditionary corps, and it was also some kind of coalition against Frenchmen. Lord Marlborough, ancestor of Winston Churchill, also ran expedition, but those days were, you know, so long ago, and people did not see wars like people at the beginning of the 20th century, with press, with mass mobilization, with industrial wars, with battles in which hundreds of thousands of young men and soldiers died. They perceived it differently, and that is the case. I do not believe that the First World War could have been avoided. Unfortunately, there were so many initiatives. Kaiser Wilhelm, he wanted to be ally with his cousins in Britain. He even donated that monument of William of Oran in order to point out that some kind of solution for Britain came from, you know, from Europe, from German lands. Before it, he wanted to make some alliance, continental alliance, with his cousin, his Niki from St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas, Emperor Nicholas. But that was in vain. And at the end, I would like to point out Fritz Fischer's thesis. At the end, the war started by the will of Germany. And it was not so that that war started as some kind of extension of Eastern question. I do not underestimate Austria-Hungary or Serbia, but it is the fact that Austria-Hungary and Russia were the last two powers we started to waging war between each others. Germany first announced war to Russia, then to France. German decision to attack Belgium, which was some kind of core of continental politics of France and also of Britain, made Britain to be part of it. And everybody regrets, for overwhelming majority of countries, the First World War was not people's war. It was people's war only for Serbs in Serbia and Montenegro. For everyone else, it was something like a coincidental incident which was done due, as Christopher Clark argued, work of moonwalkers, messaging. I would say that this is the right time to think about all those reasons, because I remember when 14 years ago, and I will conclude with it, Margaret Macmillan, very distinguished British-Canadian historian, colleague of Lord Owen, she visited Serbia, and then she compared the years before the First World War with the years and months and maybe weeks before the global crisis of 2008. And she said that everybody thought it would not going to happen. There were several occasions, maybe dozen of occasions, since the Kaiser's telegram of 1897, since first Moroccan crisis, and it never happens. Nobody is crazy enough to launch the war, but at the end it happened. Similar issue was with the crisis of 2008. It did not end with catastrophe, but maybe some next time it would. She argued that. For me, the thesis of distinguished Lord Owen is very important, and we should think multidimensional about all issues which happens to us now, because I would like to remind you that some historians argue that President Kennedy was very, very cautious about Cuban Missile Crisis because he read one book about origins of the First World War during the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Antić, for your lecture. Now, I think if maybe Mr. РУСИć has some comments also, if you would like, you have a floor.
Thank you very much. I will be short because after Lord Deјвид Овен and after Čedомир АНТИси, there is not much left to say. Yes, I agree. It is very interesting view and alternative view on the First World War, which gives us, let's say, more diversity into not only understanding the First World War once it happened, but also understanding the situation before it and whether it could be avoided or not. People who knows me always say that I'm like very optimistic person. That's why I still believe, although I might not have strong arguments, I still believe that with a little bit more reasonable attitudes of the great powers of that time, the Great War could be avoided, or at least, if not avoided, at least to be shorter. Of course, it's not easy to speak from today's perspective, because today's perspective also takes into account human rights and takes into account also making focus not only on the territories, but focus on the population. What I want to say by that? I will a little bit just shed a light onto the Balkans at that moment, because of course the Balkans, the situation in the Balkans was not the top A situation that caused basically, in a real sense, that caused a First World War to start. However, if we go into the principles which were applied only 4 years later, and I'm talking about Versailles principles, about self-determination of the people, about taking into account will of the people. If such basically approach was taken into account in 1914 or even before in 1908, maybe things would look different. I said just maybe. Let me be more precise. At that time, Austro-Hungary just take Bosnia and Herzegovina as a part of its territory without respect to the two main arguments for claiming some territory. Okay, there is 1,000 arguments, but two main are often mentioned. It's like ethnic argument and historical argument. In case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we are talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina from that time, in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Austria did not have even ethnic ground to claim that territory, neither historical. On the other hand, Kingdom of Serbia was very much criticized by the Austro-Hungary to basically putting those claims on the agenda. Okay, at that moment, ethnic composition of Bosnia and Herzegovina was such that Orthodox Serbs had a relative majority, but at that time, majority of Muslim population, the majority of Muslim population was declared themselves as also as ethnic Serbs with a Muslim religion. So if we take that into account, the numbers, then there is much more argument on the side of Kingdom of Serbia to talk about Bosnia as potential part of future federation, whether it would be Yugoslavia or some other name of the federation, rather than Austria. In that sense, I can understand frustration of the Kingdom of Serbia, basically because of such approach from Austria, because Austria was claiming to take something which did not belong to it, neither ethnically nor historically, while Serbia had arguments on both of these sides. To add more into that, from the lenses of today's human rights perspective, right of people to express their will. One fact which is well known, but still I would like to repeat it. In 1918, when population of Bosnia and Herzegovina and other basically parts of at that moment former Austro-Hungary were declaring where they would like to live. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the situation was as follows. Out of 64 counties, at that time it was 64 counties, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 52 declared that they would like to be in the same state as Kingdom of Serbia, which is roughly speaking between 70 and 75%. Let's just imagine that such a referendum was organized in 1908 or 1910 or 1912, whatever, and then asked population of Bosnia and Herzegovina, would you like to be or stay member of Austro-Hungary? Of course, it's easy to guess that they would say no. Okay, there is slight possibility that maybe they would say yes, but okay, I'll take this on my shoulder to prognose that they would say no. Of course, now, sorry for me making like this focus on the Balkans, but I just wanted to connect with what Mr. Antić basically said, that Kingdom of Serbia and Kingdom of Montenegro were suffered a lot. If I'm not wrong, we are talking about between 20 and 25% of the population which vanished after the First World War, which was demographic catastrophe. Which was yes. Now you can see basically the ethnic map from that time. I deliberately picked up not ethnic map which were created by some Serbian scientists, like for example Jovan Cvić, but one French map, and also there is like one German map, how they saw this area in terms of ethnic distribution. So even if the most beneficial map for Germans, let's put that way, because of course they would make a map with a little bit maybe more emphasis on their ethnic distribution, and it's not by coincidence that when some sites in making map in order to present their presence, they use the strong colors. So you can see that, for example, German cartograph used this red color to show distribution of German-speaking population, while they put on the same map, for example, put France in light colors. Okay, let's not dig up deep into that. Basically, what I wanted to say is that unfortunately, some of the principles who could theoretically be considered in 1914, they did not consider, because only 4 years after that, we had Versailles principles, which basically took into account will of the people. So I cannot imagine the situation that humankind became clever in only 4 years. I would rather believe that such principles were in minds of some decision makers even before, but of course, for some reasons, they were not put as priority number A. Sorry for my long expose, and once more I would like to thank to Lord Deјвид Овен and to Čedomir АНТИси and to Institute to organizing such an interesting event, because as we can see, even 110 years after the Great War, and it will be, and again and again and again, there is still something to say. This is the topic which will never be ended in terms of what if and what could be done differently, and what are the consequences of the Great War or First World War, because as we all know, Second World War maybe would never happen if we did not have First World War. Some of the experts from history claims that basically Second World War was just the second episode of the First World War. So I will finish with that. Thank you thank you all once more.
Mr. РУСИси, thank you very much for your expose. Now we will move to the questions from the audience. We now have a question from Tanja Vojic from our the most, let's say, the oldest and most respected journal, Politika. So the question for His Excellency Lord Owen. Would you consider that Foreign Minister Edward Grey pushed Great Britain in the First World War and triggered that war in any way? So, Sir Owen, question for you.
Well, I think that Grey was a strange figure, really, to have been Foreign Secretary. As I said in my introduction, he didn't travel at all. And you wouldn't recognize the activity of British Foreign Secretary on planes flowing to and fro across Europe, but also going around the world. And why did this man get this post? Very hard to understand. And of course, the Foreign Office was very small in those days. I think he was aloof from problems, obviously instinctively French, and much too suspicious of Germany. I mean, he was forced really to accept that Haldane would go out to Germany and negotiate. And if when Haldane came back, he was friendly to Grey, there was no real problems between the men. If he had backed Haldane with some additional input and feelings, I think it would have been very, very different. And when Haldane's proposals came, it all sort of began to hinge on words, really. Britain was not prepared to give Germany a commitment that they would never come together with France. They weren't going to give that up. They weren't going to give up friendship with France. They weren't going to sign a treaty with Germany. We would always stay out of any war. And there was this wording which was discussed between them. How much of a commitment could you give Germany if that they would not be involved in any war? We weren't prepared to say that we would be completely outside it. We would sign a treaty and an agreement with Germany, but it would not be a commitment to not go into the war with France. We couldn't do that. That was not, and he was quite right over there. And of course, the missed opportunities were considered very seriously by the German Chancellor. He says that he regretted that his talks couldn't have been more forthcoming. And there the problem was that the British wanted some acknowledgement of the German shipbuilding program. They wanted Germany to accept that they had a large navy, but they couldn't accept an arrangement whereby Britain would tie its hand. I think that, you know, why I called it this, the hidden perspective, is if Britain had been more aware, more members of the cabinet had known that they were being committed to come to France's rescue if they were attacked, there would have been very much more controversy about that. The makeup of the government, when Asquith came in as Prime Minister, contained a lot of liberal people who didn't like war at all. And when they heard that we were already committed to all this military maneuvering with France, they really got hostile to it. Certainly at that stage, we would not have come into the French war with Germany. But by the end, after all the things that had gone on, even somebody like Lloyd George, who was hostile to the idea of Britain entering into a continental war, they were committed. Once they saw Germany not listening and being ready to move in on the Low Countries, so we call them Netherlands, Belgium, the cabinet swung slowly in 1917 to an inevitability of war, and that we would be on the French side. So when the actual war came, when the warning was given to Germany not to do what they were up to, and they went ahead and did it, there was no real dispute in Lloyd George's cabinet. They were ready to go to war. And many of these people were basically peace orientated. They didn't approve of fighting in South Africa. They didn't want Britain to be an aggressive military power. They believed that the Navy and the preeminence of the Royal Navy was a tool for diplomacy. And I think it could have been very decisive. Say the war had started, Britain had stayed out of the war, still friendly. We could have said, we will not accept any German ships going through the Channel. And we will not accept any movements of German Navy coming between Calais and Dover. That would have had quite a considerable impact on their room for manoeuvre. I'm sure that was what we would have started to use. And we could also use the Navy, if need be, to shell from the sea on certain key ports. But we could certainly have also blockaded German ports, all the time as part of a negotiation to bring about peace. So we would have been a key activity of Britain would have been to bring the war between Germany and France to an end in as honorable a way as possible, and not necessarily choosing a side, being a genuine arbiter. And I think that's what we should have done. We were not instinctive continentals. I say that with a smile, as you may have noticed. We are no longer parts of the EU. I reluctantly, but nevertheless, given the opportunity, became a Brexiteer, because I didn't want to have ourselves tied up in one part of what I call a large continental Europe. I don't think. So there is a British instinct, which was, I believe, there in 1912, 1911, to be an arbiter, to help Germany and France to sort out their problems, but not to be involved in the war itself. I think that's a more geographically sensible view of British influence. We're an island race. We don't have to be involved in the controversies of war. The Second World War is slightly different, but even there, I'm not going to go now into the Second World War, but I think some of the obvious factors can be seen reproduced in the start of the Second World War. But we were much more active in trying to stop that Second World War.
Thank you, sir, very much for your answer. I believe that now Director Jurkovic have a question also.
Yeah, Alex, thank you very much. And as we are waiting for another questions that should be coming at chat, I wanted to ask you for two things which might be somehow related. First, concerning actually the First World War and the whole atmosphere actually that you tried to very wisely explain was not necessary, needed to go to exactly what we got after that. When you pass through the documents and actually internal debates within Britain proper and Britain elite at that time, did you find actually people or important subjects who were let me say, supporting idea of preemptive or preventive war? Because in the long-term perspective, and I will connect that, of course, with our current very dangerous situation, which resembles partly to the problems we used to have at the beginning of that century. In many ways, the rise of Russia and Germany as an economical you said Navy power, especially for Germany, but also Russia was having fantastic demographic expansion in the 19th century. Were there people in British elite who were actually thinking about possible preemptive or preventive war, or especially First World War, or as a way to push actually Germany and Russia against each other in order to definitely reduce their ambitions in the future? That's the first question. And the second one, of course, I do have to ask you, although this is not the basis of our actual meeting, but I cannot resist to ask you for the comments about the 90s, which in a way some people also saw as the third time repeating of the clashes, or some people even spoke about Third World War happening at the Balkans at that time, and so on. So I just have to remind our younger colleagues that you were involved in drafting several proposals, but that actually your basic idea was about the possible general conference in which once for all we could find some, after a lot of negotiations and mediations of the foreign powers, solutions which would more or less go along the ethnic lines and help us got, let me say, a permanent peace without big unresolved questions. So my question is actually why that idea failed, who were the ones that were strongly against that, and especially how does it look to you from the actual perspective? Thank you very much.
I'm not quite sure where I'm expected to go on that question. I mean, I assume you want me to draw on some of the experience that I had when I was trying to bring peace into the Balkans, initially with Cyrus Vance and then later with Stoltenberg. Is that the case?
Yeah, that was the second question. Actually, why your basic idea, let me say, couldn't be fulfilled at that time?
Well, I think that it's got extreme relevance at the moment. I mean, there is no doubt that there are forces and pressures for the Dayton Accords, which bear actually, of course, a great deal of relationship to the Vance-Owen peace plan, are coming up again. Now, I'm under an inhibition on this issue to discuss it. You do your best to try and get peace in the war between the three main elements in the former Yugoslavia, and you don't succeed. And now it's up to other people. And people always ask me to comment. I stay clear of it. I wrote a book about it all in very considerable detail called Balkan Odyssey. When you write about those sort of controversial issues, you expect a lot of dispute with your book, people challenging your facts. I've never had a single challenge to any statement I made in Balkan Odyssey in the book. I wrote it with the papers in front of me. I was lucky enough to be able to write with them as the negotiator with Vance and then later with Stoltenberg. But I also had, you know, a lot of other sources of information, of course, from my own supportive country, Britain, and they were very supportive. John Major asked me to go and do this job. Bloody one, I may say, and took me away from my family for 2.5 years, and I'd given up the House of Commons. And so I have to be careful what I say. But I know I'm talking to an audience. Why am I on this program? I have a great respect for the Serbs and Serbia itself. I don't make any secret of that. I think it's a great country and must be treated by people who have traditional hostility and people with traditional friendships, with respect. But I look at the scene at the moment and I see trouble ahead, serious trouble. And therefore I think that this moment people should be thinking about how to have peaceful resolution and be aware of the dangers of any playing around with the settlement. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but I would hope that Serbia would not get involved in encouraging the Serbs in Bosnia to restart the war. Will have very dangerous consequences. I would hope too that Russia and President Putin would be very wary of using their good relations with Serbia to encourage Serbia to start reopening some of these questions. I don't think his intentions are related to bringing peace in the Balkans. I think it's to cause another part of the world where there would be dissension and dangerous dissension. Now, I am somebody who worked very closely with Russia in trying to bring peace in the Balkans. And I found the government, predominantly one of President Yeltsin's, extremely helpful. We had Russians in the UN UNPROFOR force, and they worked very well with all their colleagues, extremely well. And all I can tell you is there is absolutely no reason whatever to believe that there cannot be a peaceful relationship between Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that it is no interest whatever of Serbia or of the region to exacerbate present tensions and start another war, and certainly not so as part of a Russian philosophy of opening up different areas of world tension. We've got more than enough in what we're seeing with Ukraine, and we do not need another fight in Europe and on the outskirts of Europe. So I can only say to the Serbian politicians, not many of them were there then when I was there, but I have great respect for Serbia. Serbia is a great country, and it should not allow itself to be used as a tool either of NATO or of Russia. It should have its own individual policy, and it should do its utmost to try to resolve disputes with Kosovo and not allow the difficulties. It's easy for me to say so. I'm outside of politics now, really. But I'm absolutely convinced that it would be very foolish to play around with the settlement that eventually brought peace. And I think that anybody who is encouraging Serbian politicians to stoke the fires, to take a little movement. We know that inside Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is an element of Serbian people that are still unhappy at the settlement and would like their independence. Don't go down that route. It will not be profitable to anybody, and it will be very, very damaging to start that war all over again. I don't say everything is perfect, and I don't say that things can't be done, but particularly in Kosovo, we need more understanding and less provocation. And here I think that there's a very important area for countries like Greece not to get involved in the sense of choosing sides, but using their influence. For example, now we have another argument about Macedonian name, for goodness sake. I don't let this issue be provocative. It's to put into the plate to be provocative at the moment. We know perfectly well what they're up to. But Greece and Macedonia sorted out its problems over a name after years of toing and froing. We shouldn't have any further issues on that score at the moment. So I watch this region very carefully. I've spent too much of my years and too much of my time away from my family and trying to bring about peace, to want in any way to say anything that is provocative. But nothing in this world is very satisfactory. We all of us have problems with issues. Look at Britain. We had endless problems with Northern Ireland, and more or less a disguised war going on for years and years. We've resolved that at the moment, and now we have a quite remarkable situation in which you have a person running the situation in Northern Ireland with from Sinn Féin in origin. And slowly you're beginning to see a way in which the dispute between Northern Ireland and the South will be solved, and that there will be eventually a united Ireland. We can't push it too quickly. It's not something for next year or even the year on, but slowly there's a pattern, there's a way of working, there's a partnerships that it can produce a settlement which will really last. But don't play around. And that's my view about Bosnia-Herzegovina. Let these issues settle. Don't provoke. Don't create another war. It will profit nobody. And you certainly should not do it, because it fits in with an overall Russian strategy. The day will come when Russia will be more cooperative with the world, and the day will come when Russia will go back to being what it was for a short time, a hugely influential and good partner of all of us. And I do not believe that we are destined, certainly in Britain, but actually throughout Europe, to have a sense of war, hostility with Serbia. So stick to peace. Stick to the resolutions that came out of the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Look carefully at Kosovo and try and find ways through that problem, and they still exist. And above all, work very closely between Serbia and Greece. And I remember how hugely helpful at various times the Greek government were, Karamanlis, whose son is now the Prime Minister of Greece. And Greece can play as a co-religionist with you in Serbia to bring about ending of these tensions. So I won't want to do anything now to exacerbate the obvious tensions that exist once again in and around Bosnia-Herzegovina. Croatia has good relations. That's for the moment, and I would say now probably permanently, not a hostile relationship. So the war has changed that for the good. And I believe that those in power in Bosnia, in Belgrade, in Serbia, I don't know many of them, but I hope that they are all the time seeking a resolution of the difficulties within Bosnia-Herzegovina between Serb and Muslims and Catholics. I use the religion, not to say that that is the divisive factor. There are many other factors that have caused the wars. That religion is, in my view, nowhere near as big as history. So, without sounding too disengaged, I'm not going to propose of things and what should or could be done at the moment, except for a real inner belief that there must be no more fighting, no more wars, that the Serbs should be self-confident, proud, and important players in the region. And if you are running into difficulties, solidify your friendship with Greece and use Greece to help you resolve some of those problems. I hope that helps. But my heart is with you. Of course, I can't spend all the amount of time I did on peace in that region. I can see the fires that could easily come back. Serbia don't play around with this and make their own decisions and not be influenced by Russia. Russia at times has been your friend and a good supporter. Russia at times has been a very creative force for peace in that area. And that will come back again. We're not doomed to fight with Russia. We're not doomed to have eternal wars in the Balkans or any other region. We just got to live through this rather difficult period at the moment, when Russia has to settle down and accept that history creates facts, and those facts have got to be borne in mind and can't be changed by war. And you in Serbia, keep to your independence and your great history of your own country, and be guided by that, not by those outside. I don't think there's a moment that would be helped by outside intervention. I think you've all been through the war in the Balkans, too many of them. You all know the score, and you should be left, in my view, to deal with this issue by yourselves. Sometimes maybe there will come another time where a little bit of outside help may be welcome, but I don't see it at the moment. But I do see a very serious and central role for Serbia.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Eric, would you like to take over, or we have two more questions from the audience. We can start with them.
I'll answer any question you like, but then I want to end.
Of course. Two questions. First one is from our colleague, Stevan Gajic, research associate from the Institute of European Studies. His question is, what is the future of NATO and European security in general after the end of conflict in Ukraine, which is, as it seems today, likely to end with Russia's victory?
Almost all wars end in negotiations. The Second World War was different. Roosevelt said that he would not accept a negotiated settlement, that there had to be total victory. I think he was right, probably. But in almost all conflicts, I think you are better to be always open to peace initiatives which might bring a war to an end earlier. The Second World War was a very, very different war. It left legacies which even now still we are wrestling with. And I think that wars practically never solves anything. And Russia will soon discover that again. those boundaries that were settled after the 1945 have got to be respected. And then when Russia itself changed, you know, it was Yeltsin who went and created the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Belarus. That was a Russian decision. It wasn't imposed on them by anyone at all. He took the initiative over it all. So they're fighting their own history. That's what they're really fighting over Ukraine. This is an inter-Russian argument. But Ukraine is a separate country. And I think that it was a ridiculously counterfactual for Russia to invade Ukraine. This idea that you go back in history and start to change history and boundaries and everything like that, and ignore those things that went between. We can't ignore our history, and you make your history. And Ukraine was made once again into an independent state by Russia. It was a consequence of the breakup of the communist Russia. Now, somehow that appeal has to go to and be understood by President Putin, a highly intelligent person. I've actually never met him, but I feel I've met him because I have a close friendship with Henry Kissinger. And time after time, I kept seeing Henry, sometimes because I organized it or because he did, after he had seen Putin. He had the great respect for Putin's, his mind and his intelligence. And I believe that Russia has a great future if only they can accept that history creates facts. And they're trying to change those facts. They become emerged out of wars. It's just a recipe for ever-increasing warfare and ever-increasing battles. We just have to accept some of these boundaries are permanent and have to be examined and treated as such. And they can't be changed by war. And therefore, Ukraine, NATO didn't adopt an aggressive position over Ukraine. NATO adopted a very interesting position, is that we would help the Ukrainian people fight themselves. We were not going to go in and fight with them. They had to, we would help them with arms, we would help them with advice, we would help them with economy, but we would do the same for any other country who was recognized by UN boundaries who suddenly find them changed. But we didn't change that view. I'm a very strong supporter of Ukraine, but I don't think Ukraine needs NATO membership. And I think we should be very, very careful about using NATO membership as a way of resolving this problem. It's far, far better for us to focus on getting an agreement between Russia and Ukraine itself. And if there's some adjustment to their boundaries and peaceful negotiation, well, so be it, you know. It always was anomalous, actually, that Russia, with that great mass of continent, didn't have access to the Black Sea. It had to come to Ukraine to get use of the port. So if one of the natural outcomes of the end of this war is that Russia has, by agreement, access to the Black Sea, it's no more than is a natural situation. I used to be involved with a steel mill in Russia, 600 kilometers south of Moscow. Very, very efficient German-designed steel mill, run in the old Soviet way, but then with partners of mine, run as a very successful Western industrial steel company. thrives and is prosperous. So I watch very carefully, and hopefully, it's not for me to say to the president of Ukraine who has been attacked when to negotiate or how to negotiate. But it is for me, anyhow, I will say it. I've had enough experience now in war and trying to solve peacefully, that this war must come to an end through negotiation. Some wars can go on for longer. They need longer before you can negotiate. There is no reason whatever for not trying to solve that war now. They don't need anything more, any more facts. They should go into negotiations and reach a resolution. And I don't think myself that you can deny that fact. And I believe it will come. And I hope it can come very soon.
Thank you, sir, for your answer. And now the final question before we finish today's event. It's from the audience, Alex Vukadinovic. Question for His Excellency Lord Oven. Would you say that NATO intervention in Yugoslav wars could be one of the reasons for today's Russia-NATO relations? Further in, can NATO intervention in Yugoslavia be one of the reasons for beginning of Ukraine crisis in 2014?
I didn't quite understand the question. Can you put it in your own words?
Yes. So, would you say that NATO intervention in Yugoslav wars could be one of the reasons for today's Russia-NATO relations? Further in, can NATO intervention in Yugoslavia in presumably 1999 be one of the reasons for beginning of Ukraine crisis in 2014?
Probably. I wouldn't say definitely, but probably it is. Usually, wars have repercussions, and frequently those repercussions go very deep. It's why you should try to avoid war. You try to resolve things around a negotiation table and give and take. War creates facts, and it also creates closing of minds. It's much harder, usually, to reach resolution once there's been a battlefield. But I think that Russia will soon realize that there's a better way of living than having endless wars. And that this idea that they can change the whole map of the world again and go back and have a land link through Belarus to their enclave in the Baltics is madness. It will never be accepted by Poland, and it will never be accepted by modern democratic Germany. And therefore, don't try to do that. Just have friendship. Just have good relations. And I think that, in a funny way, one of the most important things that has happened to NATO, and we will be seeing that first really in Washington in the next few days, when there is this meeting in NATO. NATO now has Finland and Sweden as members. If I was a Russian, I would say to myself, this will make NATO more understanding of Russia than could happen with anything else. Those two going into NATO is not hostile. It will create a deep-seated knowledge of Russia, both in their different ways, establish long-standing relationships with Russia. And I think it would only be the utmost reluctance that the Finns in particular, but also the Swedes, decided that they needed this NATO. I knew Olaf Palme very well indeed. I was the treasurer of the Palme Commission, and I've known Olaf for many years. If you'd asked me at any stage in our friendship whether Sweden will ever join NATO, I would say no, and certainly not him. But I see now why Sweden has made that decision, and I see why Finland has made it. But it is not necessarily hostile to Russia. Those two countries go into NATO with a real understanding of Russia, a real understanding of its fears, of its greatness, and of its weaknesses. I mean, it will be a much more knowledgeable NATO responding to Russia because of the addition of these two countries. It is not, they have more to influence for good within NATO than they were having in their own bilateral relationships with Russia. So that's one way of looking at the world, and you may not appreciate it, you may not think that it's correct even, and I may be wrong. I've always been an optimist, you may have noticed. Even in the most dire moments of the Balkan Wars, I kept on believing that people would actually eventually come around to a negotiation. And I'm very pleased that they have done, and I believe that can hold and should hold. And sometimes we all have just got to face up to these dreadful boundaries that we have, which often cross relationships and things. It's better to live with the boundaries you have in Europe in particular, but it goes for the world as a whole, and then starting to solve them by war. There's no war way that will solve the problems of Taiwan, for example. You just have to live with the unsatisfactory nature of history and then get on with it and shape it around the history that you've been bequeathed by your forebears, and don't feel that we've got some ideal solutions by endlessly changing the maps. What you need to do is change the minds of people and make people who are historically feel that they are not able to form friendships, that they can form friendship, they can work together. And look at Japan and Britain, for example. We've just had the Emperor of Japan on a state visit to it, and up the Mall, that big street that goes from Buckingham Palace to Admiralty Arch, you see these Japanese flags. When I was a young boy, and I would have thought that would never happen, that Japan would come together with Britain in such a friendship way. And I think that we ought to be more creative in the way we see our relationship. And I come back here to Serbia. You are a very important and proud and solid country. You shouldn't be, I nearly used a very rude word, which I'm glad didn't come out of my mouth, but you shouldn't be mucking around. Play your role, which is a serious role, a strong role, a legitimate role. And when you need help, go to Greece, your co-religionists, talk through with them, and don't allow under any circumstances this Macedonian name issue to come back up. We've made a deal, and you in Serbia should tell your friends, and Greece tell their friends. There's a wider agreement. We're not going to have that. We're not going back over that again. Thank you very much. Well, I hope I've helped you. I'm an old man now. I've just had my 86th birthday. My days are numbered. But I don't want to see another war ever between your countries and the Balkans. You've got too much friendship, too much history, too much goodness between you all to spend your time fighting each other. Don't do it. Don't be encouraged to do it by anybody. And form your own history of quite proud nations who've lived with each other for many, many decades and centuries, and can do so and must do so for the future.
Thank you, sir, for your answers. And now I will give floor to Director Đurković with his closing remarks.
Now, I just really want deeply to thank you for being with us today and giving us quite a lot of insights, not only concerning the introductory intervention about the First World War, but actually making the parallels with what we've been facing nowadays. Thank you very much. It was really great pleasure, honor having you with us. As you said, your age are pretty great one, I could say. Anyhow, congratulations on fantastic state of mind, and if I could see body as well. And I don't know how often do you travel today, or you're eager to move around, but if you have any wishes to come back in this area, we would be more than happy to be your host eventually in the future. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best health, and to continue with such a worthy and important insights and sharing it with young people especially. All the best.
Thank you.
Very much, Ozan.
Goodbye.
Have a nice day.
Dear guests and colleagues, thank you very much for being with us on this webinar. It was, as the director said, it was a great pleasure. Please be with us for future events, and you're always welcome at our institute. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Goodbye.